Hi everyone, I'm Sudeshna, and if you don't know me already, I'm a career strategist. I run the abundancepsyche.com, and I also happen to have a corporate day job. So, what I actually focus quite a lot on in whatever I teach is how to tell a story. And today I am so excited because we have Jilliane with us, and Jilliane actually is a master at storytelling. She is a TEDx coach, she's the Story Slam founder, and she's also founded a narrative approach. She empowers entrepreneurs and business owners to tell their core stories. What I thought would be really great is for Jilliane to give us her insight into the career space where storytelling is often underrated but equally powerful. So, Jilliane, thank you so much for coming over.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Any chance I get to talk about storytelling, I take it.
That's great. That's why we are having this conversation, and I love it. So tell me, Jillian, how did you get started on it?
Yeah, my path with story goes way back to actually it was 1998. I had just graduated from high school, and I grew up in this tiny town where we didn't know anything about I mean when you're 18 you don't know anything about anything, but we were particularly censored and living in a bubble wrapped world in this tiny town. And after graduation, my friends and I decided that to celebrate, we were going to go on a big road trip. So we borrowed my dad's car, drove across Canada because I'm Canadian. And so we drove for 4 days because Canada's huge. It took us ages to get across the country. And when we got to Windsor, Ontario, my brother was living there at the time, and he took my friends and I across the border to Detroit, Michigan. And when we arrived in Detroit, we ended up at a festival, a storytelling festival. So I was sitting in this auditorium, and a woman dressed in this bright red dress got up and walked on stage. And I sat there, not really knowing what to expect. And I can tell you that as soon as she opened her mouth and started speaking, I was gripped. I was absolutely wrapped. And I sat on the edge of my seat listening to every single word she said. It felt like she was talking right to me. You know that feeling when you're just in sync with whoever's speaking? That's how I felt in that moment. And I knew, as soon as I left that auditorium, I knew I need whatever it is that she has. So we went back home after having this wonderful trip. And I was 18. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any education other than, high school. That's all. But I knew what I was going to do because I'd seen this storyteller perform. And I immediately signed up to take speech arts and drama lessons. And from that moment, there hasn't been a single time in my life when I haven't either been working as a storyteller, studying to become a storyteller, sharing stories with people, and helping other people to share stories. That's what has guided the rest of my life. And I share that story because, yes, I saw a storyteller, I became a storyteller and a story coach. But what's really important is that I saw a storyteller and it changed the trajectory of my life. And that is the power of story.
Wow, I love it. I love it. And oh my God, there's so much to unpack in there itself. But I noticed a couple of things that you said. One, you noticed the storyteller perform, and actually what you were doing there with the mic, with your hands, with your body. Yes, there was a great story, but all of that added up to the story. So tell us what you were doing there.
I mean, I was telling a story.
You're a good storyteller, but tell us how.
Yeah, so thank you for that observation. I really appreciate that. And what I think what story is a combination of both intellectual content, but also performance. It's where acting and public speaking meet.
Mm.
So I shared a story with you. There was a whole narrative, beginning, middle, and end. There were characters, shape, all of that. There was tension, there was a conflict, all of that. But I mean, at the core, there was a concept, an idea that I wanted to share with you. Story is driven by images and emotion. It's like logos, ethos, pathos. I mean, of course, story is heavy on the emotion side, and that's what makes it really powerful because, as we all know, people make decisions based on emotion and they justify
Mm.
those decisions with logic. So anyone who has an important message to share, no matter what that message is, whether it's, I'm going to a job interview or I need to give a keynote address to 750 people, you have a message to get across. And if all you're focused on is the content,
Mm.
you're missing 3/4 of the equation, because we communicate in ways that go far beyond the intellectual content. So yes, thank you for observing the things I'm doing with my body and my face and all of that. I mean, that's the speaking component, learning to speak really effectively, learning to really embrace the fact that we communicate with more than just the words we say.
Mm.
But then in terms of content, it's content that tickles my brain and content that also tickles my heart. And that's what story can do.
Yeah.
So there's layers there. There's layers there.
Yeah, no, that's right. The first thing that you said was when it was 1998. Oh my God, that already reminds us of something. And then you said we went across the country, drove for 4 hours. Canada is a big place. Also about the storytelling experience, you used some nice visuals, and I almost that gripped me in. So there was an element of, I guess, imagery, there were sounds, there was time, there was space, and then you were doing this entire thing with your voice modulation, with your hands. And even though I can only probably see just a portrait sort
Yeah.
of a
Uh, yeah. Torso
profile,
and up. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
even then
Hmm.
there's so much that you are communicating ra- without it just being the words. So that's
Exactly. Because when we communicate, um, yes, we have words and ideas that we've thought a lot about, like when we communicate, we want to make sure we get the right concepts across. And so it's really easy to spend a lot of time on this perfectly crafted message that you're going to share, labor over every single sentence, choose all the right words. And then we go to share that. But if all our effort has gone into those perfectly crafted sentences, well then, I mean, what about the messages that you're sending? Because you're sending messages whether you are thinking about it or not. What about the messages that you're sending with your eyes, or with your eyebrows,
mm,
or with your facial expression, or with your body? Because
yeah,
all of those things come together to communicate. What about the message that you're sending with your pitch, or the speed at which you're speaking, or your volume? I mean, whether you are making a conscious choice or not, you are communicating with your whole person. So yes, I want to help you craft a beautiful story and a beautiful message, and I want to help you learn to communicate that really effectively. And a big chunk of that is the content. What is the actual story you're sharing? Another big chunk of that is, what are you doing to get that message across in the most powerful way possible, with your voice, with your face, with your arms, with your hands, with your eyes? Because we communicate with all of it.
yeah. Okay, so let's stop there for a second, just to kind of break it down for our audience who are probably either looking at finding a new job, getting a promotion, um, going for a raise, or they could be senior execs and looking to build up confidence for speaking up on a podium. So if we touched upon each of those aspects, every aspect has, and I strongly believe that every aspect should have the story in it, even if you are just writing your resume, even if you are just filling in a job application, there should be a story in it. Where you can't at times be physically present, so to
Oh, yeah,
speak.
absolutely. Yeah.
So is there a way people can use the skill of storytelling on their resumes, for instance?
Absolutely. I mean, I think story is at the core of every one of our communication points, or it should be. When we make story the core, then people have the opportunity, like you said, to be engaged in lots of different levels, be engaged with from an emotional point of view, be able to envision images, and it's a way to paint a more fulsome picture of yourself that feels connective. So I think about, if we're talking about a resume specifically, I think about ways you can show the narrative of your life. So when you're crafting a resume, you're pulling bits of information together about the different types of jobs you've had, the things you've learned, the progress you've made, the change you've affected. Um, and I guess also, when we're crafting a resume or a CV, it's usually, this is how I like to do it. You look for the specific job that you're applying for and pulling out the messages that speak to that specific job.
Mm,
And specifically, I like to always, like when I'm crafting a story, the core always has to be, who am I speaking to? Who is my audience? There's three parts, three parties involved in a story. There's you, the storyteller, then there's your audience, and then there's the story. And
mm,
story is driven by conflict. So if we're thinking about the audience that you're crafting your resume or your CV for, think about, well, what is their conflict? What is the thing they are struggling with? And how am I going to come in and be the hero in that equation
mm,
and solve that conflict? So how can you craft your message around that conflict? And I mean, what makes a true story in the truest sense of the word is it has a beginning, middle, and end with that dramatic arc. So how can you show through your story that you see that conflict, and you can take that conflict all the way through from the beginning, middle to end? Um, and when I think about, my particular job experiences or your particular job experiences in reference to this problem, think about
mm.
how you can craft little narratives for each job experience that you've had that shows that you see that problem and you can solve that problem. You see that problem and you can solve that problem.
So effectively, the listener, or who you are telling the story to, is the person who has the problem or a similar problem that you have solved throughout your career. You are the hero or the prince or the white knight, whatever.
Yeah.
You come and see the problem, you have an approach, you resolve it, and therefore, as a result of you being there, um, the doors to, I don't know, wherever, the problem just vanishes and everything is great again. So is
Yeah,
that the
absolutely.
sort of structure? Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of, and I'm thinking specifically around this concept of conflict, and really trying to identify what are the conflicts that this company, that this potential employer is going to hire me to solve, and then making sure you show how you can solve each of those conflicts within that resume, crafting little narratives around it, telling little stories about how you have done that in the past. Like whenever I go into a job interview, I make sure I go in with my pockets full of stories. I've thought about all the potential questions they're going to ask me, and then I've crafted stories to respond to each one of them. And those stories, and this is because, of course, any potential employer wants to hire you for evidence-based reasons. They want to know, they want hard, solid fact
Yeah.
that you have solved this problem before. And
Yeah.
in a job, in a employment scenario, the best way you can present them with that evidence is through showing that you've done it before. And the way to show that you've done it before is to tell a story about how you've done it. So, I mean, I go into a job interview having practiced all of those stories in my head out loud. I practice them with my friends. I practice them to my stuffies. I practice them at every opportunity possible. I go through story after story after story. So why not take those stories and pop them right into your resume? And
Yeah.
and I mean, of course, the step one is, what is the conflict that they want solved? And then step two is, how can I demonstrate that I have solved that and put it in a story? The particular challenge with a resume or CV is that you have, like, 3 sentences. Like, it has to be really, really short. Whereas in an interview scenario, you might have 3-4 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but you can certainly frame that out. Like, there's absolutely a way to write a 1-sentence story, present conflict, show the journey, beginning, middle, and end, solution.
Yeah, love it. Brilliant. So, and going over to the interviews when you have slightly more time, and I guess competency interviews or competency questions in interviews are becoming more and more common these days. Tell me
Mhm.
about a time when you had a spat with your coworker and how did you resolve it? And those sort of questions are becoming more and more prevalent. And how can people use, I guess, the story in how you just mentioned the conflict, the resolution, but also use just the performance that you were doing with your voice and your your the rest of your body. So how can people use that in an interview context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, step one is to think of all the potential competency questions you might be asked.
Hmm.
Make a list if that helps you. Come up with every single one of them, and then think of story after story after story. So, do I brainstorm this out in my head typically, but why not brainstorm it out on paper if that works better for you? Think of all the examples that you can come up with, and truly, it's examples, but then framing those out in a story. I mean, that's what an employer wants to hear. They want to hear that you have dealt with this before. And sharing it in a story format is such a rich opportunity to communicate a dense amount of information. Because when you tell a story, you're communicating an event, you're also placing yourself as the hero, which is makes you sound pretty badass.
Mm.
And then you're able to communicate so much with your body and your face and your voice when you tell that story. Story tugs at the heartstrings, because you're able to communicate all of that emotional content. And this is something that I think would be a great takeaway. So the next time you're preparing for an interview, do those first 2 steps that I mentioned. List out every potential question you might get asked. Think of all the competencies possible that every employer wants, and write a question about those competencies. Every one of them starts with, tell me about a time when.
Mm.
Then brainstorm events from your life. It doesn't matter when, really, just brainstorm events from your life that speak to every single one of those competencies. So that's like column 1, column 2. Next column, think about the emotion in that story, because I'm telling you that the 2 secret ingredients to a successful story, the first one is emotion, the second one is images. I
Mm.
mean, you mentioned that yourself, Sudeshna, when you were responding to my story about my 1998 trip. You
Yeah.
said, oh, I could imagine it in my mind. That's when you know you've really gripped your listener, is when they have pictures popping up in their brain as you communicate. If you can do that in an interview, it's in the bag, right? So
Yeah.
so list the emotions and then list the images. Then
Yeah.
practice saying that story out loud. And if you can capture that emotional content, I mean, that demonstrates EQ right there. And
Mm.
that's going to win your employer over. Oh, this person has feelings. I want them on my team, right?
Mm.
Because then you know you have like a whole person who's going to function really well in a team, right?
You are dealing with a human being, not a robot. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great.
And so thinking about emotions, like I know it's not always easy for everyone to show emotions. I've worked with a lot of people who genuinely struggle to show emotions. So I'll give you a game to play. And that game is simply list a bunch of emotions, happy, sad, scared, confused, curious. And we'll take a single phrase, say, shut the door. Sudeshna, I want you to say, shut the door as if you're scared.
Shut the door.
Excellent. Okay, now I'm going to do it as if I'm curious. Shut the door? Now do it as if you're really confused. I know I just did curious. Let's do angry. Try angry.
Oh, shut the door.
Yeah. So see how when we flip from emotion to emotion, the things you're doing with your face and your voice change. So practice that and think about, what am I changing? And then apply that when you come to share your story. Engage your face, engage your voice. Think about not just what you're saying, but how it feels. And that will bring so much more depth to your story.
Wow, I love it. This is like gold right here. Layer with emotions, imagery, what you are doing with your face, what you are feeling inside, and try and bring it back when you are actually telling the story. Wow, I love it. This is blowing my mind. So so I guess when we just add on that another layer, which is I suppose where you help most of your clients when they are standing up on the stage and I guess delivering a speech or just performing out something. I don't know what sort of clients would these typically be who are who you are helping.
Yeah, a lot of my clients, they're business owners. So business owners and teams. So for example, one of my clients recently gave a speech to an audience of 750 emergency response officers. She was a former Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. Another one of my clients recently gave a speech to at an entrepreneurial conference. But then a lot of my clients are looking for stories simply to underpin their business,
Mm.
stories that will help them communicate really well one-to-one with their clients, whether it be on a social media post or in a blog or on their website, their About Me page. So clearly understanding those stories that identify who they are as a business person helps not just really give you a framework for understanding what makes you you in your business, but also then that content gets shared in sales calls, in presentations in front of your colleagues, in your social media, all of that. But then I also I work with teams. So right now I'm working with the communications team, and each one of those team members is sharing those stories in their work context, whether it be in a board meeting or with a bunch of colleagues in a meeting. So
Yeah.
varied, but the core is people in business who have a message to communicate.
Yeah. Okay, so I get it. So in the sense that when you are preparing up for something, say a resume, an interview, or even a big presentation that you have to deliver to, and you can prepare, what about the times in life when, in the day-to-day business context, you and your co-workers are having a conversation. But I suppose this power of storytelling can be effective there as well. So how do you have any tips for people who want to be using this just in their day-to-day life rather than, for the big meeting up there?
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful question because I 100% believe that being able to use storytelling skills can enhance so many different aspects of your life. So, and a lot of it is like, like just social communication or communication with friends and family. So, and my, I guess my biggest tip is never leave home without a story. And this is something that I say, like I never leave home without a story. I like to say I have stories in my back pocket all the time. And it's one of the things that I help people to do is I help people to craft what I call their core stories. So 7 stories that I know will help us all in all aspects of our lives, whether it be professional or personal. So for example, like an origin story or a value story or your vision for the future story, right? um, Now in terms of like pulling those together and simply being prepared to communicate effectively through story, I think there are a few simple things that you can employ in your day-to-day life to help you with that if that is a goal of yours. And of course, like with anything, the first priority is practice, right? So
Mm.
simply try. And I think so. So, for example, if you really want to figure out a story that you want to share or find stories, because I have so many clients that say I don't have any stories, and then we talk for half an hour and suddenly they have 5 stories. Um, One of the things I invite you to play with is simply a journaling exercise.
Mm.
So I invite people to take a journal and go through their day, and when an event happens that seems interesting or curious or it's just something that strikes you, jot it down. And at the end of the day, you might have 3 or 4 notes there. So look at those notes and decide which one strikes you the most, put a circle around it, and then ask yourself, well, what happened before that? And what happened after that? Do that for a week, and at the end of the week you might have a story there that you feel is a story you can tell, something you can craft out and practice.
Mm.
When you decide you want to craft that out and practice it, simply take a piece of paper, and my number one rule is no full sentences, no paragraphs, because I don't want you to get caught up in choosing the right words. That's something a writer does. We're talking about sharing your story out loud. So think about beginning, middle, and end, and just maybe draw 3 big squares on your paper and look in the first square and say, what are the big images or what are the feelings? And truly think about it in terms of images and feelings. And then just try telling it out loud and see if there's after you tell it out loud 3 or 4 times, find a person you can tell it to. If there's no one around, set up a photograph or a stuffed animal, something that can stand in as an audience so you can really get that feeling of sharing it with someone. Does
Wow.
that sound doable, Sudeshna? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And once I suppose you start doing that, even if you are not sure about whether the story is good enough or not, you can try it out with friends or family or colleagues at work 3 or 4 times, and then you get the real-time feedback of, did this work? Is this a good story? If yes, you keep on polishing. If not really, you can ding it. So I guess that's how the most powerful stories come up, and the more powerful they are, the more sticky they are in some ways.
Yeah, and thank you for those additional thoughts. You're absolutely right. Story is iterative. It is something that you do and then you do again and again and again. And the more you do it, the better it's going to get. And that applies to a specific story, and it also applies to your life as a storyteller. And I mean, I feel like I said something that's just like common sense, like intuitive.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it needs saying.
Oh,
And
but
mostly because I want you to be generous and gracious to yourself and give yourself permission to share your story, and give yourself permission to share your story as you. Don't feel like you have to be a certain kind of storyteller, or do be as expressive as I am, for example. Like, not everyone is going to have it as expressive or as loud of approach. Your approach might be more subtle, your approach might be more expressive and louder than I am, right? Give yourself permission to share your story in your own way.
yeah, and I guess what I'm taking away as me personally is practice. I guess so many people just gloss over the fact that this requires practice. You just need to repeat, 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 and then maybe you are getting somewhere, and yet again, you'll have to repeat. So brilliant. I love this. Uh, so, Jillian, almost towards the end, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah. So knowing that I'm speaking specifically to people who might be looking for work, or people who might be looking to advance in their careers, I just invite you to think about the different communication points you have in your day, within your organization, within your team, or as a job seeker. And think about, what do I want my audience to think, feel, or do? In this communication situation, what do I want this person to take away from this communication situation? Whether you're going to a job interview, or speaking in a meeting, or teaching a seminar, whatever. Think, feel, or do. And then I challenge you to think about how you can craft a story to share that message. Try it and see how it affects things, see how it impacts things. Um, I know that story can really have a massive impact in terms of helping people to connect with you, in terms of motivating and inspiring people, and in terms of helping people to remember things. Um, and and if I would love to hear what sort of outcome you have from experimenting with story. Hit me up on social, because I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. And where can people find you?
Jilliane Yawney on Instagram. So that's Jillian with an E.
All
Um,
right.
and you can also find me on Facebook at A Narrative Approach.
Brilliant. I will link up the social media profiles and your website as well in the YouTube video. But thank you so much again for sharing this brilliant few minutes with us, and yeah, this amazing approach with us. Thank you, Jillian.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Happy
uh,
storytelling, everyone.
Yes, happy storytelling. Okay, on that note, we will end here, and thank you everyone for joining in.